thinking about the evening, I became aware of the fact that there are many in our congregation who have lost people in the Shoah and whose names are specific names rather than the event of Jewish history are on your mind tonight. And so for those of us who are that much closer in that sense, you know, we send you love and we join you as a circle of caring and awareness. This evening is a long planned program by an organization that a member of our temple and two of his friends, Michael Lerner and Susan and Herb Cohn, formed. And the organization is called Katsar, which means harvest. And I'm most familiar with it from Leviticus chapter 19, where it says you should leave a corner of your fields for the poor. It says the word katsiracha is used there. And it's an interesting word to think about on this occasion of remembrance. It's both an ending and a beginning and nurturing and awesome. In the Portland Jewish community, this is really the second part of an observance that began tomorrow evening. And if we could just for a moment, if we were not there, visualize that survivors of the Shoah spoke and were honored and remembered, and candles were lit in honor, in memory of the word 6 million has been used so much, but in memory of the 6 million. So you have in each of your pews, there's a copy or two or three of Mishkan Tefillah, and that's there because we're going to sing a few songs, and I'm going to give you page numbers, but they're probably familiar with anyway. And we're going to begin. The program is going to unfold as it's listed here, and we're going to begin actually with our temple president, Robert Fasir, and then Mark Blattner, who is the president and CEO of the Jewish Federation, in his amazingly busy schedule. And if you don't see Mark in action, you receive his emails each week, and he's really kept the ballast of the Jewish community during these months and months and months and years now of crisis. And so we're very fortunate that Mark can include our program in his schedule. We also share a sanctuary with the Lake Oswego United Church of Christ, and the fellowship that we share is, I think, unique in the history of Oregon in a very beautiful way. And it's a sisterhood and a brotherhood of deed and of faith and awareness. And we're going to hear this evening also from the moderator, which is like the president for those of us who are in Reform synagogues, the moderator of the church, Nancy Warmser, and the El Malei Rachamim, which we'll stand for a little bit later, will be sung by Rebecca Wilbur, and we'll conclude with the what is, I guess, called the Kaddish of the Holocaust. So, delighted to call you forward, Robert.
Erev Tov, everyone. I mean, it's an honor to be here. I'd like to share with you thoughts from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, former chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth of the United Kingdom, on the matter of God in the Holocaust. When posed with the question, why did God allow the Holocaust to occur, Rabbi Sachs responded, the first time I went to Auschwitz, I was simply overwhelmed. I asked, God, where were you? And words came into my mind. I was in the words you shall not murder. I was in the words, you shall not oppress a stranger. I was in the words that were said to Cain when he killed Abel, the first murder in the Bible. Your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. As a personal observation, it is remarkable to me that murder appears so early in the Torah, making so clear the gravity of the prohibition of the taking of life. To continue with Rabbi Sachs' remarks, when God speaks and human beings refuse to listen, even God is helpless in that situation. He knew that Cain was about to kill Abel, but he didn't stop him. He knew Pharaoh was about to kill Israelite children. He didn't stop it. God gives us freedom and never takes it back. But he tells us how to use that freedom. And when human beings refuse to listen, even God is powerless. Rabbi Sachs further offered this prayer for Yom HaShoah. We remember the victims of the greatest crime of man against man, the young, the old, the innocent, the 1.5 million children, starved, shot, given lethal injections, gassed, burned, turned to ash, because they were deemed guilty of the crime of being different. We remember what happens when hate takes hold of the human heart and turns it to stone. What happens when victims cry for help and there is no one listening? What happens when humanity fails to recognize those who are not in our image, are nonetheless in the image of God? We remember and pay tribute to the survivors who bore witness to what happened, and to the victims, so that, robbed of their lives, they would not be robbed also of their deaths. Today on Yom HaShoah, we call on you, Almighty God, to help us hear your voice that says in every generation, do not murder, do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor, do not oppress the stranger. We know that whilst we do not have the ability to change the past, we can change the future. We know that whilst we cannot bring the dead back to life, we can ensure their memories live on and that their deaths were not in vain. And so on this Yom HaShoah, we commit ourselves to one simple act. Itzkor, remember. May the souls of the victims be bound in the bond of everlasting life. Amen.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Mark Blattner. I'm the CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland. And Robert and Michael and Rabbi Berg, thank you for having me here tonight. Many years ago, I came across a story in Haaretz, a leading daily newspaper in Israel. And the story has stayed with me to this day. About 20 years ago, a gentleman by the name of Ron Fulman walked into a tattoo studio in Tel Aviv's Dizengoff Street, accompanied by his parents. He asked his dad to uncover his left forearm and told the tattooist, "I want an exact copy of that tattoo." The original inscription, B1367, was seared by a German soldier into the arm of a 10-year-old boy in June of 1944, on the day he arrived at Auschwitz. The boy was sent alone from Poland and did not know what happened to his parents, whom he would find only after the war. The reporter then discusses the father's experiences during the Shoah and how when his son Ron proposed this idea to him, he was appalled. He eventually cooperated as he, the father, understood his son's desire to replicate the tattoo as an act of solidarity. More interesting, however, is Ron's own perspective. Here's what Ron said. "The tattoo was not done as a demonstration or public statement. It was about my relationship with my father and the family members who survived and those who did not. My father was in the hospital at the time, and for the first time I felt in danger of losing him. It was purely emotional. I didn't think of the meanings behind it. I felt I had to, better yet wanted to, make a private statement about my feelings towards him and the Holocaust. It was a desire to tell him that his son understands what he had been through and shares his pain. As for the Holocaust, perhaps it was to tell myself I would never forget. I'm still not really sure how to interpret or what to make of this story. At first reading it, I felt myself shuddering, thinking, why would somebody put themselves through the abuse and degradation that was inflicted by the Nazis? Plus, for many, tattoos in the Jewish tradition are understood as desecrating the human body. But another part of me sees the beauty in this action. The son is doing his best to ensure that he would always remember and be able to teach that the Shoah was not just a horrific event in our history, but rather it was something that happened to people that we know and love. Through the numbers on his arms, he would remember his father's stories and experiences. He would pass them on to the next generation. We best understand that it is through real personal connections, through relationships, that the Shoah has stayed in our hearts as real, horrific, and life-altering. And though we may not all be survivors or children of survivors, most of us have learned about the Holocaust directly from the lips of those who suffered. Emil Fackenheim, a Jewish philosopher who escaped Germany prior to the war, and who I actually had the pleasure of spending a Shabbat with long ago in Jerusalem in 1993, he builds on this understanding that we were given 613 commandments. He says that with the Shoah came a new revelation, what he called the 614th commandment. He divides it into 4 components. Jews are forbidden from giving Hitler a posthumous victory. Jews must survive as Jews. Jews must remember the victims. And Jews must not despair of God, or Judaism will perish. To Fackenheim, this was rational philosophy, but it was also something that he felt at a deeper level. There's a problem, however. Sadly, in the next few years, like Ron Fulman's father, the last of those who witnessed the Shoah firsthand will have passed. There will be no one left with whom we can have this personal connection. We can read history books, we can watch Schindler's List, we can teach a unit in history, we can go online, we can even remember the Holocaust through our liturgy. But this is not enough. They do not produce the same visceral responses as a personal human connection. Without that connection, the Holocaust may cease being the calamity that brought about Fackenheim's 614th commandment, and instead just move to the annals of Jewish history to be just another holiday, another observance day that we do once a year. It's not just enough to never forget. We must continue to feel. The Shoah is part of who we are. It is not that we should live our lives as if we're in fear or on the verge of destruction. Rather, we must maintain our strength as a people. We must use this annual day, Yom HaShoah, to remind ourselves that we can never forget, that we must act and find ways to bring these stories to the next generation and beyond in a way that brings it to life, that transmits its meaning and weight, and that passes the human connection to our children. A few days ago, we concluded the Passover holiday, the festival where we are commanded to teach, once we were slaves, now we are free. Yom HaShoah demands that we do the same. We pass on to our children the sense that we were all victims, that we are all survivors, and that we must all fight for a vibrant and spirited Jewish life. Especially today, with the rise in anti-Semitism, the memory of the Shoah is much like the Exodus. It's the telling that we must pass on to our children. We must help our children to remember the atrocities and victims. We must help our children to know that the Jewish people will continue to flourish, and we must help our children to know that there are those who survived, and we are all among them. Amen.
Which side? Which side?
First in Indianapolis, which is on page 636, and
Eli, Eli, shelo yigarem eolam, acho b'chayam, rishrus shel hamayim, berach hashamayim, tvilat ha'adam, acho b'chayam, rishrus shel hamayim, berach hashamayim, tvilat ha'adam. O Lord, my God, don't let these things ever end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart.
Erev Tov, good evening and welcome. My name is Michael Lerner, and I am the president and CEO of Katsar Corp, a newly formed not-for-profit corporation. Katsar's mission is to provide no-fee digital access to Jewish educational materials and resources for both individuals and participating organizations. Our corporate name is derived from the biblical Hebrew word katsar, which translates as harvest or reap, and can be used either as a verb or a noun. Our name is inspired by the words of Leviticus 19, verse 9. We are sowing seeds for the harvest by others while attempting to stretch the corners to the very heart of the fields. We gratefully and with humble hearts acknowledge the generous support and encouragement of Congregation Beit Haverim, the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland, and the Kleinstein Fund of Beit Haverim. Thank you. I'd like to take a moment and reintroduce the membership of our leadership team. You've already met Herb and Sue Cohn, who led us in the singing. Who is not attending us but is participating via Zoom is Eric Waldbaum, who is our secretary. The leadership team of Katsar is pleased to present this evening's community observation of Yom HaShoah. In recognition of this solemn event, I will be discussing the exhibit you walked through this evening. The exhibit was entitled Money, Law, and Genocide. This exhibit explores a largely misunderstood and underreported atrocity that occurred during the terror of Nazi Germany. Both my comments this evening and the charts in our exhibit are largely drawn from two primary sources: The Splendid Blonde Beast by Christopher Simpson and Soviet Judgment at Nuremberg by Francine Hirsch. As you entered the temple this evening, you were directed to Fellowship Hall, where there is an exhibit of charts listing the German companies, many of which are still in business to this day, that benefited directly from slave labor. For the most part, this labor was Jewish slaves and included other unreliable elements, such as criminals, homosexuals, Slavs, the Romani people, long known by the exonym Gypsies, political dissidents, communists, the homeless, and anyone else the Nazi regime wanted out of the way. Based on current research, at least 1.5 million Jewish, Polish, and Soviet children, defined as persons under the age of 18, were deported as forced laborers, slaves, to Germany. Additionally, there were millions of children forced to work in German-occupied Eastern Europe. Children worked in all branches of industry, in agriculture, and as domestics in German households. The Wehrmacht and the SS deployed children in construction work on fortifications, bridges, roads, and airfields. Two other areas of research are of particular interest. First, there was the participation of German military and civil institutions in deportation and in exploitation of forced labor, as well as the various interdependencies among childhood forced labor, deportation practices and occupation, Germanization policies, particularly in occupied Poland. Second, there is the experience of deportation, forced labor, and the lifelong impact of both, as constructed and narrated in the testimonies of multiple former child slave laborers. Organized in the immediate aftermath of World War II by the victorious Allies, the Nuremberg trials were intended to hold the Nazis to account for their crimes and to restore a sense of justice in a world devastated by violence. The complete picture of the International Military Tribunal included many ironies brought to bear as the Soviets took their place among the countries of the prosecution in late 1945. It was widely known that Stalin had allied with Hitler before the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact hung heavy over the courtroom, as did the suspicions that the Nazis falsified evidence in an attempt to pin one of their own war crimes, the mass killing of 2,000 Polish military officers in the Katian forest, on the Nazis. Moreover, key members of the Soviet delegation included the Soviet judge and the chief prosecutor, all who played roles in Stalin's infamous show trials of the 1930s. Since dead prisoners were usually replaced by the SS, the death of a prisoner was not related in the cost of camp construction. The principle of a daily rental fee instead of a labor hourly rental fee was designated to demand a high daily output from the prisoners. The daily rental fee for a male auxiliary laborer from the concentration camp was 4 Reichsmarks, and the hour of labor cost 0.5 Reichsmarks, or $30.22 is American funds, for an 8-hour working day, and 0.33 Reichsmarks, or $17.82, for a 12-hour working day. This meant that a concentration camp inmate still worked more cheaply for a 12-hour working day than for an 8-hour day, as he only worked and got paid for 70% of the 8-hour day. The choice of a daily rental fee method was thus an incentive from the onset to exploit the prisoner's labor as much as possible every day. From the point of view of the companies, the wear and tear of prisoners was irrelevant for their cost and profit calculations, as long as they did not possess special skills that only a few other prisoners could demonstrate. Only then was the death of a prisoner a direct disadvantage. There should be no misunderstanding. The primary purpose of Nazi slave labor was the extermination of Jews. The Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler formulated this in an unvarnished clarity in his infamous Posen speech from October 4th, 1943. And I quote, "Whether the other peoples live in prosperity or whether they die of hunger, that interests me only to the extent that we need them as slaves for our culture. Otherwise, it does not interest me." Dulles, Shortly before Alan Dulles took up his new post in Berlin at the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which was the precursor of the CIA, he, Alan Dulles, granted de facto asylum to SS Obergruppenführer Karl Wolff, the highest-ranking SS officer to survive the war, and to a collection of Wolff's most senior aides. The details of Dulles's deal with this particular Nazi remain buried in classified US government files for more than 40 years. Originally, there was to be a second international trial at Nuremberg, which was to focus primarily on the atrocities of German finance and industry during the Third Reich. The industrialist trial, as it was called at the time, was widely recognized as of equal importance to the prosecution of the Nazi and SS High Command. Hermann Abs and other major bankers were important targets, at least judging from the recommendations of the US war crimes investigators at the time. In the Second International Tribunal, the Soviets planned to expose the connection between American and German financiers and industrialists who profited from the Nazi enterprise. However, Justice Robert H. Jackson, with the tacit support of his colleagues in the British and French delegations, vetoed this plan, declaring in the autumn of 1945 that the United States would refuse to participate in any further international trials of German defendants and would instead hold separate prosecutions on their own. Thus, Soviet participation in the International Military Tribunal undermined the credibility of the trials and indeed the moral righteousness of the Allied victory. One of those separate prosecutions, the Frederick Flick case, established a legal precedent for a complete defense of necessity, a close cousin to the defense of acting under orders. The precedent contradicted many aspects of the earlier ruling on this issue by the International Tribunal. Amazingly, the legal precedent left by this series of trials seemed to be that a 19-year-old draftee who is accused of war crimes cannot successfully plead that he was acting under orders. But, ironically, the owners and directors of multi-billion-dollar companies can. The US government cut off funding for the prosecution staff at Nuremberg in mid-1948, bringing the subsequent proceedings to an abrupt end. The staff abandoned pending investigations and potential prosecutions, sometimes with little more than a note in the files indicating that the case had been closed. Less than 2.5 years later, the new U.S. High Commissioner of Germany, John McCloy, granted clemency to every single industrialist who had been convicted at Nuremberg. The Soviet leadership viewed the U.S. decision to halt denazification in Germany as being one of great political importance at the time, and in fact, the decision still remained difficult for many Russians to understand or accept to this day. The U.S. abandonment of denazification weakened the alliance with the Soviet Union and was a significant factor in the developing Cold War, and a considerable more important cause than was recognized by the West at the time. The German economic elite and corporations that had been active under Hitler remain active for the most part, though without the Nazi rhetoric and the police state powers of the Nazi period. There were generational changes in German industrial and financial leadership in the years following the war. However, the fundamental pattern in German finance and industry has been continuity and stability. It is evident that U.S. policy entailed an amnesty for much of what German business had done during the Holocaust. There are to this day unresolved war crimes, charges against prominent German business leaders, which were brought before the United Nations War Crimes Commission and other international bodies by governments as varied as the Netherlands, France, Poland, and Yugoslavia. Jewish efforts to extract even modest restitution payments for work performed by concentration camp inmates from prominent companies, such as Messerschmitt and Ernst Heinkel, continue to be rejected by these corporations. The same is true of German construction companies such as Philipp Holtzmann, which has been identified as a major benefactor of forced labor. Holtzmann refuses to pay restitution and continues to enjoy contracts all over the world. Even those companies that have made some form of welcome restitution, Daimler-Benz being a recent case, go to considerable lengths to deny any culpability whatsoever for the Shoah, portraying their payments to their former slaves as simply a form of charity. All of these contributing factors ultimately led to ending the War Crimes Commission and to any real semblance of accountability or justice. Let the accumulated facts about this continue to multiply so that the future generations will learn that these persons did live, these events really took place. May the memories of all who face these horrors be sanctified with joy and love. May their souls be bound in the bond of life, a living blessing in our midst. Thank you. Toda rabah, ein großer Gedank.
Good evening. My name is Nancy Wamser, and as you've heard, as church moderator, I am Robert's counterpart at your sister congregation, Lake Oswego United Church of Christ. It's my deep honor to be with you here tonight on this Yom HaShoah. Thank you for the invitation. My faith teaches that we are not only sister congregations, but that individually we are siblings in our common humanity. And as your sibling, and on behalf of LOUCC, I'm here to join with you in mourning all those who perished. May their memories be blessed. In bearing witness to the survivors and their stories, and in carrying those stories forward. And perhaps most importantly, at this dark time, in renewing our commitment to always take sides against oppression, persecution, and the denial of civil and human rights. This is a sacred responsibility to those who lived and died during the Shoah, and to our own children, grandchildren, and all those who will follow us. We know the dangers of unchecked bigotry and scapegoating. We see the impacts of greed in the ultra-rich and the immorality and destructiveness of fear-based leadership in corporations and in our own government. In this century, we know that cruel lies are magnified and spread instantaneously, only to be embellished and relentlessly streamed across airwaves and cyberspace. Once again, we see corporations working with the government to collect personal data, to manipulate, control, and track the population. We know this is a dark and dangerous time. And yet, at every protest rally I attend, we always chant, "Stand up, fight back." And that is indeed what we are called to do in these very times. We stand up for immigrant justice. We stand up for the rights of our queer and trans siblings and children. And we stand up for all who are marginalized or threatened in any way because of who they are, where they come from, or what they believe. And we fight, not with guns and drones, but with our voices, our votes, our boycotts, our advocacy, our letters, and our protests. We fight with our hearts and all that is in them. We fight hate with love. So on this night, when we remember Mordecai and Elevitz and all those who fought back, who fought against evil during the Shoah, we pledge to fight back with connection and compassion, remembering the words of the child martyr Anne Frank. In the end, the sharpest weapon of all is a kind and gentle heart.
Please rise. You can find the El Male, the prayer that those who have passed are at peace with God. You can find the translation on 582 if you would like.
Im Kadoshim Shalom Amishkava.
To our loved ones who have entered eternity, grant clear and certain rest with God in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold them in the embrace of your wings. Secure their souls in eternity. Adonai, they are yours. They will rest in peace. Amen. The Kaddish for Yom HaShoah is on the inside if you received a handout. So we're going to read the Aramaic, the Kaddish that you're familiar with, and then just quietly say the name of the site of the death camps beside it. So, Yitkadal, Auschwitz, V'yitkadash, Lodz, Shemei Rabbah, Ponar, Ba'alma Divra Chirute, V'yamlich Malchute, V'dain, B'chaye Chon V'yome Chon, V'chaye Dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala Uvizman Kari V'imru Amen, Yehei Shemei Rabbah Mevarach Leolam Omei Omaya Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam V'yitnaseh V'yithadar V'yitaleh V'yithalal Shemei Dekudashah Barichu Le'ela Min Kol Berchata V'shirata Tushbachata V'nechamata Da'amiran Bi'alma V'imru Amen Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chaim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen Oseh Shalom B'mramav Huya Aseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Amen. Each word that was spoken from this bima has stirred us. Thank you all for being witnesses to the words that were spoken. Thank you for delivering messages, each and every one of you, and for presenting music that transformed us right to the place where we wanted to be tonight and where we will be for a very long time after tonight. If you turn to page 676, if you happen to have a prayer book handy, we're going to sing just in English without much musical talent with me leading you. The last two verses in the English verses of the partisan song. You're familiar with it from Yom Kippur afternoon. It's sort of down there in the bottom of the page. I wish my Yiddish was up to the Yiddish, but it's not. You must not say that you now walk the final way, because the darkened heavens hide the blue of day. The time we long for will at last draw near, and our steps as drums will sound that we are here. The time we've longed for at last draw near, and our steps as drums will sound that we are here. From land all green with palms to lands all white with snow, we now arrive with all our pain and all our woe, where our blood sprayed out and came to touch the land. There our courage and our faith will rise and stand, where our blood sprayed out and came to touch the land. There our courage and our faith will rise and sing. Amen. We are of one heart this evening. Drive safely home.